And so at a very fundamental level, most exhaustion burnout is actually your emotional system shutting down. It's not a head issue. It's an emotional system
Right.
issue.
Hey, hi, everybody. Welcome to Culture Talks, where we talk to next gen leaders who are making a difference around how people and organizations thrive. And today I'm delighted to have as our guest the wonderful Janice Taylor, who's a well known and high impact psychologist, sports psychologist, as well as a someone who's really dived deeply into the notion of emotional wellness. She's starting another venture. She's if you go onto her LinkedIn profile, you'll see all kinds of really interesting things that she's done, both on the emotional wellness side and on the technology side, and she's marrying the two right now. And we get her at the early days thinking about how she's going. Janice, welcome to Culture Talks. And where
Yes.
where are you this morning?
I am in the wonderful Vancouver, British Columbia. Thank you for having me. I want to do one caveat just because I want to make sure I am a future psychologist because I'm still in graduate work. So I'll just make sure that I'm not official yet, but I'm close. I'm
All
close.
right, and she's too modest to brag. Her graduate work is this funny little school on the East Coast called Harvard.
Yes.
And so we share that between us. I know with all the stuff you've got going on, it's a real battle to navigate that into your calendar and everything else. So well
Yes.
done.
Thank
Hey,
you.
just tell me a little bit about, like most Canadians, probably Sunday, 5 in the morning. What were you doing?
Geez, I was a little asleep, and then where I'm living, heard some noise upstairs. I was like, okay, I better venture up. And then just watching our pride of Canada, who are the most, classy individuals of sportsmen, and then seeing, poor Connor McDavid not get the gold after two Stanley Cup losses, which I know what we're all talking about, even though he was MVP and he had a heroic run. This gentleman has such heroic runs, and it's like real life drama.
So why don't we use that as a bridge, maybe, to kind of just talk about emotional wellness? I've got to imagine, because I know that you deal with a lot of high performance athletes. So let's just park there. Wouldn't ask you obviously to get personal based on client privilege, but if you just step back and look at someone like McDavid, he's a human being first. What's Connor going through?
Oh, so, if we think about emotional fitness, most people clump it in with mental fitness, like they're the same thing. And
Right.
so you got to think about your head, which I affectionately would say stinking thinking. And then you have an emotional system. They work together, but they're very different. So imagine being someone like Connor. And this is really, I think, he has a topography that's very similar to a lot of really identified very young, which may or may not be a good thing, as the future hope of anything, whether you're a singer, a talent, whatever it is. When you're singled out really young, what it does is in many cases, you're trying to protect that young person who's got all this greatness that people recognize, adults recognize early on. But it also separates you early on in your development from an emotional perspective. And so when you see that happening, what's difficult is the merge that needs to happen after that, where they can really play as a cohesive team and you can actually be one part of a whole. But there's this grand canyon between those two things, which is very much, again, what we talk about from emotional fitness, where that shows up. And in a guy like Connor, who has not just a league, a franchise, a country looking at him, his stinking thinking must be just,
Yeah.
yeah.
Intuitively, we have this idea around that there's something related but different between mental
Hmm.
health and emotional wellness. Intuitively, I think we get it, but we
Yeah.
mesh those two together. And I hang out with so many organizations where I talk to the head of HR or I talk to one of the top executives, and they say we're all about mental wellness here and mental health, and I'm going, gosh, there's so many expectations of a leader these days. We're not therapists, right? We're not. Most of us we have a hell of a hard time just enough, getting things from A to B as a leader. Can you walk us through a little bit of the difference between the umbrella mental health and emotional health?
Yeah, if you can kind of think about them, first of all, like you think about the brain and the heart, right? You'd say, well, the heart has to function this way. And if you're a surgeon, it works this way. And if you're a neurosurgeon or brain surgeon, the brain works like this. But everybody knows the two of them communicate together. So mental health and mental wellness is what is conscious. It's in our cognitive thinking. But what we don't understand as a society, that everything we begin to observe in real life began in our emotional system first and then travels to the head. We assume that it starts in the head. We see it in our conscious brain, in our mental construct, and we think that that's the origination. But what leaders really need to understand, people that are working in environments, and whether it's a team environment or you're working at this from a perspective of looking at all, of an organization, anything that is groups, is that things began in the emotional system before they even get to work that day. And so what you have is, you can imagine this emotional system is a bit like an iceberg, it sits underneath, but it's actually what you hit first before you have a mental thought about it. And so what we don't understand as a society is that emotion, that emotional system is actually hindered. And so we assume if we just think better or have better thoughts or better conversations or conflict resolution, that we're going to solve this with the head. And it couldn't be more further from the truth, because the emotional system is like our sonar system. It is our radar to our environment. So it starts in the emotional system and then it goes to the head. So these poor leaders, and I want to say anybody who is in charge of anything, like just anyone who has to lead a team, be a manager, doesn't matter the generational ages. What we have to begin to understand is that before that person arrives at their desk by 8 a.m, they've been emotionally activated. They've probably been on social media. They probably had something at home that they're dealing with. They woke up with a pervasive feeling, a thought of not knowing what that is. We're trying to eat. We've been through traffic. We're doing all of that. And so we're coming to work with already like a little bit of a volcano that's starting to bubble.
Yeah.
And then all it takes is like one thing for someone to say or do, and boom, the volcano explodes. And then we try to take this emotion and then we try to make sense of it with our mental construct. And that is repeated trillions of times a day, everywhere, all over the world, all day long.
So, with this additional insight we're getting, and about emotional wellness, I mean, um, how is it related to some of the early work on EQ? Are they connected? And
Yeah, great question. You can kind of think about like emotional fitness is a system. So,
yeah,
I always jokingly say EQ, emotional intelligence, is the alphabet. It's the calories to physical fitness. And we know that they're important and they fit within that, just like calories do in physical fitness. But physical fitness also includes our physical body system that processes food and fires up our engine and has oxygen and breath and movement in our limbs. Like there's a lot that go into our physical system. So what we used to think is that we just had to be smarter about emotions. And I jokingly say it because people will do an emotion wheel. They think if we had better words to describe our emotions, we would understand them better because we would use our mental construct. And if we understood and thought better things about our emotions, we would understand them. That's actually kind of false, because if we don't understand the system that the emotional feeling comes out of, all the language in the world is not going to change the fact anymore that if you understand how calories work in your body and you still eat 6,000 calories when your body only burns 2, chances are you're going to gain weight. It's so having awareness and knowledge is a portion of the puzzle. But we need to, from a society perspective, really understand it as a system. What happens when we have a feeling? Just any feeling. How do we respond? How do we become motivated? How do we become activated? The term that people use now is triggered. They're triggered, they're triggered, they're triggered. So people run around trying to change and soften language so people aren't quote unquote triggered. It's ridiculous. It's kind of ridiculous. I said it's like putting a Band-Aid on a gorge. The person was triggered with or without the trigger. So they're already emotionally activated.
Yeah.
So
all these things are going on, right? So I'm going to make it very personal. I've been at this quite a few years, as you can tell, and I'm constantly learning, right? And I'm trying to learn about myself and be more elevated in my self-awareness. And so I think I've gotten better. I'm a long ways from it because I'm a boomer trained person to put a lot of veneer on myself. But so it's been a real progress just to name emotions, to be able to identify it. And so I'm working on that. And then I hear about language out there in the workplace, like, psychological safety, which is important, but also, language that's emerging around trauma and all kinds of language. And I'm going, wow, there's so much going on out there. So as I just look at myself, as I develop myself intellectually and I can develop, and I try to stay reasonably well physically, how do I start to work on my emotional fitness, Janice? How do I make it?
Great question. Well, there is some knowledge that is powerful, and I'll talk about Jane Fonda because she was of your era that you would probably remember.
Not older.
And so remember, you're not that old, but I even remember in the 80s, Jane Fonda came onto the scene and said to people, "You need to exercise."
Right.
And she had Jane Fonda's, tips. And I remember being a kid, really little, and my mom saying, we didn't even get gym class, phys ed class until grade 12. They didn't give us phys ed class to the girls.
Yeah.
So girls didn't even get phys ed. And I'm from Saskatchewan. My mom said, we got phys ed in grade 12, which oddly enough, that teacher was fresh out of school trying to teach women in the 50s, when my mother was in high school, gym. And she said, we didn't exercise. It was not a thing. And, Jane Fonda said, you need to move. And everyone was like, whoa, what's that? What? We're not athletes. And so there was this separation between those that did sport. But even then, if you looked at those that did sport, the golfers were smoking cigars. They weren't fit like they are now. They were having a whiskey on the 18th hole, and like fitness, you did sport, but fitness wasn't a way of life.
Right.
And, I joke with my kids because we didn't have food labels when we were growing up. So I actually thought Velveeta cheese was real cheese. Like because the word was in it. I'm like, well, Velveeta's cheese.
Yeah.
Cheese Whiz is cheese. And then you realize that it's on the cupboard and not in the fridge. And you start to think about these things. But we didn't have food labels. Now you could literally speak to anybody and any level of education, and they'd be able to tell you about calories. They probably know what proteins and carbohydrates are. And they probably tell you everyone should exercise. So this is why you have men and women in their 70s and 80s still bike riding, on Saturday afternoons with all the bike riders with the padded pants like they're in the, Tour de France. So, if you think about that world, that was an evolution of understanding that physical fitness was for everyone. Now coming to the emotional fitness, we are at the bare bones of saying, hey, an emotional system is separate to your mental fitness and your mental construct. But we are at the start, Lorne, of really starting to educate people what goes into the emotional system. What is it? How does it operate? How does it show up in your life and in your body? But we also now understand, I've been at this for 30 years off and on, looking at it, analyzing, doing research and analysis of different theories dating back to Carl Jung, even looking at Aristotle and Socrates and even the Bible and saying, okay, what are they all saying about your humanity, albeit differently? That's why it took 30 years for me to really get to the core root of the emotional system. And the thing that's most fascinating about it is that most of us have an injury to a fundamental component of our emotional system that has us operate as humans. What differentiates us from animals. And it's really at that level, but we don't even have the basis of that understanding from a scientific perspective, but as a general population. So where we need to go in this emotional fitness system is we need to start with first understanding it as a separate entity from our mental construct as a society as a whole. As a society as a whole, we have to accept and get to a place of understanding like we did with physical fitness. And this is why they have, seniors still lifting weights and understanding that they need to have muscle on their body to prevent osteoporosis. Like, if you think about all of those advancements, they could only happen because as a society, we got the base level of the science.
Yeah.
So we now
Janice,
have all this actual innovations that happen. So the first place in emotional fitness is we have to educate. We have to understand it as a system.
Yeah. As someone who thinks about culture as a system, I can really relate to that because I believe that you have to be a system thinker. You have to understand things systemically. Otherwise, you get so linear and you get siloed in your thinking. And that's not the way organic systems work, certainly not the way human beings work. But the end with that is that it took us 3-4 generations to get to that level of understanding. We're still obviously early days, even on the physical side. How do we cut across the lawn? How do we get there faster? And I think you're trying to use that with AI and some other things. Yeah. Because how do we get there faster around emotional fitness? And what are you finding out about that?
I think it's really like if you were to take a whole bouquet of flowers and they all smell great together, if you kind of think about, we need to start with where you're doing your work with leaders. We need really progressive leaders to say, let's start using the languaging of emotional fitness. Languaging is important when it comes to that, and that everybody needs emotional fitness. Not everybody has mental health issues. And this is where we really need to put things back into perspective, because mental health and mental health issues that people do experience is a very real category of wellness, but not everything that we feel is mental health, and not everything that we feel warrants psychological safety, and not everything that we feel is bad, and not everything that we feel is a triggering event. But you need this combination of leaders. This is why we're in pro sports. We think pro sports is a great way to introduce emotional fitness.
Yeah.
We need it at the education. I met with a teacher from Edmonton who was concerned about his kids and how they play sports from when he was a kid. We really need a combination of folks to come together to sort of say, emotional fitness is its own category of wellness. And if we could look at it through that lens, can we then begin to proliferate this through all different types of organizations? But I do believe where you are in the space that you're in at the workplace, it needs it more than ever, because careers are being ruined. People are not able to function in the jobs, and they're looking for solutions. They're blaming intergenerational. They're blaming work from home, don't work from home. It's all this stuff. So leaders just trying to pay the bills, get the stuff done, So what you have is a group of people that are coming together, and now we have just an emotional implosion.
Yeah. So Janice, one of the things I run into, and I appreciate you acknowledging that athletes is certainly a leverage area, but also leaders are in organizations for sure. They're, leaders typically represent about 10% of a workforce. Formal leaders, everybody can argue as a leader, but I'm talking about people who get a formal role. So if we can invest in them, we know the impact that really highly supportive leaders can have, and we also know the impact that toxic leaders can have, right? Yep. So let's say one of the, and I know there's some complexity here, but I want to just open up this conversation. When I run into a lot of organizations, I hear the word exhaustion. I hear the word burnout. I hear the word, I hear that word a lot. And then you hear about, well, what do we do about that? And of course, you get everything from shut up and suck it up. You're lucky to have a job. That's one extreme to, why don't you tap into the employee assistance program? That's, maybe, I don't know if those are the bookends, but let's just say those are the bookends. But in the middle of all that are people that are trying to contribute every day while they're living their lives, and they're feeling this stuff.
Absolutely.
And I just can't imagine that we're going to reduce the complexity in the world, right? So trying to control the environment is not reasonable. No. So that's why I'm so interested in your work,
Yeah.
because we have to improve and equip people to manage their emotional well-being, to become fitter that way, to navigate the what continues to be this thing. So do you have any guidance there for
Yeah.
around that?
I think what we need to understand is that there's been a great deal of knowledge around how leaders should be different, how companies should be structured. We're trying to solve this problem using our mental thinking. If we think better or create better policies or have better conflict resolutions, or, lots of industrial psychologists are out there talking about this, about how to organize your company. And oh, it's about this. There's so much around that. And it's almost zero understanding that when people come to work, emotional toxicity or emotional unresolved emotion is like flies to rice. It is a flame that has an igniting force around everybody around you. So it's actually, in many cases, people attract more emotion, and then that elevates the temperature, and then that temperature goes up, and then now you have a collision of all of this emotion at the workplace. And you're trying to use these tools and these tactics to either repress it, just get on with it, or dance around it, which makes it worse. And so at a very fundamental level, most exhaustion, burnout is actually your emotional system shutting down. It's not a head issue. It's an emotional system issue.
Right.
Now, if we come back to part of the research and why, I'm pursuing all the things that I'm pursuing, was I asked the question that many people still argue about, but like, what makes us different than dogs? Like, that's basically what I said. If this is how dogs are and animals are in the world, is there anything that makes us different than animals? That was the question. And that's when I could really come down to this emotional injury that generally happens to the population globally before the age of 10. So when we think about this emotional injury, the flares of this doesn't go away because the event happened when you were a child. It actually, over every decade, flames and flames. And what happens is that it has kind of its own law of attraction. So you attract more toxicity and more triangulation as you're trying to actually solve this emotional problem. And so the problem with that is that we're trying to use the tools and tactics to solve something that those tools and tactics are not built for. And so they're not built for that. And they're not going to work ever. So you have exhausted leaders trying all these tactics. You have a workplace that is toxic. You have people that are unhappy and burned out and exhausted before they even come to work. And so this is where we have to look at it from a systemic issue, and we have to look at it from a cultural issue as to how this is breathing into all these organizations. And then it causes these implosions and these bombs inside of the workplace. And so the biggest thing that leaders need to understand, and so does everybody that needs to work there, almost like a policy manual. How do I operate when I'm emotional? What is my response in this emotional system when I feel a feeling, period? How do I respond? Am I aggressive? Do I shut down? Do I try to go and talk at the water cooler and have other people see my point of view? Do I go and blah, 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 blah? How do I feel validated? So do I even understand myself too? How do I have confidence? What makes me happy? What do I even like to do? Do I even like this? And so if you think about all of these questions, none of those really get asked at an organizational cultural level. So you're like, oh, I went to school to be an accountant, so you must be this person. And so you go and do said job while ignoring how you emotionally function. And so how you emotionally function and how you think are two different things.
I'm so curious. I'm so curious about one of the things that Garrett and I have come to appreciate is that this crazy thing that happens out of one thing that we've done with all our clients and all of our, whether it's at the Harvard Business School or the Executive Development School or at my MBA program or clients that I have that are large Fortune companies, always start with a process of connect before content. I bring everybody together always. I just did it just last week with a big client. I took the executive team. In this case, there were 26 of them. It was an expanded group. And I just had them share a story about. So I have a number of prompt questions. It had nothing to do directly with the culture of the organization. That was my mandate to help advance the
Yeah.
culture. What I'm so surprised with is that when I ask people at the end of my interaction with them what was most memorable, they often refer to the moment when we kicked off with this Connect Before Content, where people share a story about themselves. They may answer a pretty question like, what's the hardest decision you ever had to make? And what'd you learn about it? Or it may be something a little bit, what do you love about working here and what's missing? Some are a little bit riskier emotionally, and some are a little bit safer. But nevertheless, and I've never done the full empirical research behind that. I don't know why. I know that emotional check-in, if you would call it, is foundational
Foundational.
to that group advancing. And what's your insight on that? Do you have any kind of
Yeah.
view? Does that surprise you? Does that?
No. And in fact, the more an organization does that, so if you think about the emotional pain in the emotional system, it's got what we call the 4 Fs: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So people kind of go into the world ready, like, am I going to be hurt? Who's attacking me? What's happening? Like, they're already going with a heightened, that's what emotional pain is. It's unresolved, but it's heightened already in the body before you've even sat at your desk at 8 a.m. And so your body is getting ready for the blows or the lack of them. And so if you kind of think about that, the defense mechanisms are activated. So when people try to have a judgment conversation or a logic conversation with the prefrontal cortex, the development of that brain happened between 12 and 25, let's just say, where everything you see comes through that sort of judgment. Doesn't mean that you don't have emotion about it, but it's coming through that. So when you ask questions that are unrelated to, is this going to harm me? Am I going to be judged? Is this validating? Is this threatening my safety? Because remember, they're already heightened, right? So the Maslow's hierarchy of needs tells us that safety and love and belonging are the bottom parts of that. So people haven't adulted through self-actualization to self-transcendence. I would argue 99% of the population is somewhere between safety and love and belonging. So they already feel that way before they came to work. So they felt that way. So when you ask questions in a way of like, do you like alphagetti? Did you like blue or red? What you have is a lowering of that defense system, and you have the ability for someone to open. Because they're like, oh, okay, these questions are safe. In the brain, it's like, oh, this is safe. So when you're like, what did you love as a kid? It's like, hopscotch, hello. Like, this is why sports in such a way used to be a unifier. Now we've made it political, but it used to be like, did you see the game last night at the water cooler? This is why Seinfeld is such a great human experiment, because it's much to do about nothing, because it lowers those defenses. But what leaders need to understand is that people are coming in with armor.
Yeah.
And so there is no way for a leader to know when they've stepped on a bomb that triggers their defenses. And so the way we're operating as human beings and communicating right now is with zero thought and understanding of that emotional system that's already activated before they come to work. And so the more you can, I always say you have to trick the ego, and you kind of got to Trojan horse the ego. The way that you can go around the defenses to get the best out of people is to activate them in safe zones, which is, what were you like as a kid? What do you love? What do you want to be when you grow up, even if you're 70? Do you want to be a fireman? Did you like the color red? So what it does is it allows that expression of that emotional system to start to be rewiring away from, is this going to hurt me?
Yeah. So let's say a CEO is listening to this. Rubis, I was listening to you and that Taylor woman, and you know how committed I am to a thriving organization here, and we've invested a lot in physical well-being here, and everything from nutrition to giving people room to invest in themselves physically. And we've got a very active employee assistance program for those people who are going through very difficult things like grief and other kind of stuff. But I want to really have a much more emotionally fit organization.
Yes.
So give me a strategy or talk to Janice and give me a strategy around
Absolutely.
how do we start to do that in an organization?
So, emotional fitness, I built it for a framework. And it's a framework that would exist with a hockey team that has team dynamics with executive and hierarchy, no different than an organization. I built it as a framework. And a framework says basically, here's our common language. So, first and foremost, the whole organization, but it really starts with the CEOs and the executives, for them to understand the emotional language, not EQ, but the emotional system. And it really starts with a framework of adoption, of understanding, like, doesn't matter who on the hierarchy, emotionally, we're all the same. We all have an emotional system. It is different than how people think, but everyone's emotional system as a human race pretty much functions the same. And so if we can get a baseline of that understanding, then you can build this into the framework, right down into even who you have working with each other. Because emotional systems function really well with more similarities than opposing forces, because opposing forces of emotional systems actually can activate latent. So you start at the top of the organization adopting a common language around emotional systems, and you create a framework. And the framework exists for even how someone can move through a job advancement program. You can take this framework and say you can start at an entry level position, and we're going to actually even create a different way that we even evaluate our growth. Because when you even look at it from a job performance, when people are optimized emotionally, they are superstars. And so this is why we work with athletes, because every person will reach a ceiling of their human potential because of their emotional system is not optimized. So I don't even think it's a matter of how do I include some of this. If I was listening to this as a CEO, I'd be like, and you want performance, and you want an oiled machine, and you want a happy, healthy work environment where everybody wants to work there and you're attracting the best talent, I'd say you have to adopt the framework right now, because this is not going to change. There are no other gotcha moments. If organizations do not address the fact that people are not optimized in their emotional system, you will never get the full potential of that human.
Yeah. So we have, I've developed a framework, a cultural 10 framework. I've published it. I know it's being used literally around the world, and it's helpful. It's really helpful. You need a framework for sure, and it gets applied in uniquely distinct ways depending on the context. So I'm a big fan of a framework, and I think you're onto something, because I think a subtext of a larger organizational framework for advancing culture needs to be supported by emotional wellness in the organization. Are you? How close are you to publishing that framework? Are you?
Well, I'm an entrepreneur and a founder, so I don't really wait for the permission of other academics to tell me that I could do these things, although I am doing the academic path as well, just to satisfy the criteria. We've done our work when it comes to designing the framework, testing the framework. 2,000 people have gone through that in different variations, some as groups, some as teams, some as executives. And we're really confident in the results of that framework. And bringing Wilson into the world will be important. But the thing I think that leaders...
Our audience is your AI.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, which is been a labor of love in so many different ways. But I would say for any organization, we still have to care about performance. And when we think about performance in any other organization, we have something called mental toughness and mental fitness and mental this and mental that. And if I just think better, I'll get better results. If my mind is more clear, so I'll meditate, then I'll get better results. And anybody that's listening to this needs to understand that that's not true. You may get far with that, but you won't get optimal. And I jokingly say that it's the air when Jordan gets more air and he steps in air, and people are like, how did it look like he took another step and went higher mid-air? You need to think about that emotional system that you're trying to get to as an organization. It happens when you optimize your emotional system and you have a whole organization reaching for that air. And it's not a matter of working harder, longer hours. That's an old paradigm system. That's actually not true. And so what we do know is that humans, by and large, want to do well. They want to do well by the organization. They want to perform well in their jobs. Humans are wired to want to love what we do. That's
Yeah.
where we spend our time. So
Yeah.
why wouldn't we optimize the very feeling system that gives us the sensations and the understanding and the ultimate performance of that joy? We don't do that. We actually repress joy. So when we are so mental fitness, we actually repress joy. But we don't just repress joy for in favor of, wanting to be mentally tough and not feel. We actually inhibit the entire system. We make it not feeling anything. So when we think about exhaustion and you have this fight between trying to control things you can't control, what you end up doing is exhausting yourself that you feel so numb, so dead inside, that you can't experience the minuscule moment where you get that paper right in the middle of the day, or damn, all those columns added up right. Yay, me! You don't get to experience the small moments that make up a person's day.
One of the ironies of the old Pixar movie on feelings was that joy was the hardest emotion.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they did much research behind it. I'm assuming, knowing Pixar, they might have had good consultation on that. But I think there's a lot of insight behind that we protect ourselves because we're afraid that the shoe's going to fall, the other one's going to fall. So I can't allow myself to experience any joy because you never know, So I could suppress a lot of other stuff because I'm just not allowing for that moment of joy. But anyway, I'm in your world right now. But Janice, let's say that and I'm going, I going back to a little bit. I'm really, I think you're really onto something. And so if I wanted to then invest in that framework, do I reach out to you? Let's do a promo now around what you have. Like, how do I get my clients to reach out and to get access to the framework?
Great question. So yes, they will reach out. They can come to wilson4q.com. They can email me directly. And I have a team of coaches that I've started to train to work with executives. So I do lead a team of trained facilitators in emotional fitness. We tried to make much of this also very formulaic in terms of like how they can adopt this and how we can train that so that basically the organization itself can run its own emotional fitness engine. Right. So we say, think of your organization and you want an emotional fitness engine driving your revenues and your profits and your organizational structure. We give you all of that. We train you in that, and then you're off to the races. And then really parts of that is, again, their ability to have a place that not only do people want to be there, but it solves about 90% of a person's day in regards to that. And I love that you brought up the Pixar movie, because I want to say this, is that when we are avoiding pain and when we don't want to deal with certain feelings, it doesn't mean that those feelings go away. It means that you cut yourself off from feeling anything. And this emotional system is agnostic. It's neither good nor bad. So it's just a feeling you don't want to have. So you push yourself to live just here in this little box inside of your stinking thinking. And that's why people are exhausted and burned out, because they're trying to control this iceberg underneath. And the more an organization tries to control, mediate, conflict resolution at their way, avoid change language so people aren't triggered, adopt policies to support marginalized groups, whatever they're doing in any regard, it doesn't mean that the iceberg doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah. And so I think, it's whether you're Brene Brown and her research, or Adam Grant and his research, or Simon Sinek, stuff you're doing, the confluence in this. I haven't read Dan Coyle's latest book on Flourish. I hear it's really good. But I think generally there's this metaphor of command and control that is unhealthy, period. It's not just a command structure. It's not just a behavioral construct. It's the larger issue is that if we think we can box it all in and control it, we're working counterproductively. Yeah. And I think there's an important confluence of
And when you look at Adam Grant and Brené Brown and all their research, and it's all gorgeous and awesome, what they're missing is the emotional fitness system. So they're speaking around it, but they haven't necessarily said it's a system. It's an emotional system. And so we are really the bare bones at its salt, at its root, so that the flourishing of all of these other, whether we're talking about shame research or organizational structures with Adam Grant, whatever we're talking about around here, those are all leaves of the trees that sit on the roots of your emotional system. And so we have to get to their emotional system first. And then you pour gasoline with all these other ideas and theories, because now you have a healed root system. The root has to be addressed first.
Yeah. Well, for all my audience out there, I know that Janice is onto something. We're exploring around how to add this into the cultural mix. It's an and it's an integration. And that doesn't mean we're adding more work to everybody. It's an integration. It's how we are kind of soaking it into the system.
Yes, Lorne, it's the fuel of all these things, right? Like it's literally because, having a grandpa as a farmer in Saskatchewan, he used to say it's all in the soil. If you don't have good soil, it's hard to grow stuff. But if you get good soil, you can grow pretty much anything if you've got good soil, And so what we are, emotional fitness is the soil. It's the soil for everything to grow.
Yeah.
And so,
well, there's a hockey agent out there, Gary Johansson. He says all good players come from Saskatchewan. So there you go, Janice. So
well, we do have Gordie Howe. Well, we will keep Gordie Howe. We got a good one in lots of other. But Gordie Howe was a farmer's kid, and he could literally pick up a hay bale, they said, and chuck it.
Yeah, well, I'm sure he could, and you're chucking hay bales around the emotional world. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
If you, I'd encourage you to reach out to Janice Taylor. Do you want to? Should they go to wilsonq4q.com?
Yeah, or they can email me as well, janice@wilson4q.com. So, anything that they're interested in whatsoever, we're here to really get this into the hands of leaders. So it's important, the work you're doing, without a doubt, Lorne.
Hey, thanks a lot, Janice. I'm looking forward to continuing our conversation together. So I'm learning more and bringing it to our clients. So thank you for being a pioneer in this. It's really important.
Thank you.
Obviously, and it's exciting too. So
thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. You got to have your 5 o'clock morning disappointments to allow for life to flourish and to have experience joy, right? You got to have programs.
Yay, Connor McDavid and the boys. Geez Louise. So, we 2 silver medals, it's pretty awesome.
Awesome. Anyway, you're awesome. Thank you, Janice, for joining us. And you'll, find out about Janice Taylor and her work. Bye for now, everybody. Thank you.